Alright, so now it's time to replace the connectors on the ESC for my Traxxas X-Maxx. So I'll be replacing the Traxxas ID connector with XT90. Let's see how to remove the ESC. Now these are the Traxxas ID connectors which I'm about to replace. Now if you're someone who is not very comfortable with soldering, or you don't want to remove the connectors from the ESC, you can use extension adapters. So for example, you do get XT90 to Traxxas ID connectors, and then you can directly plug in the battery with those adapters. So in order to remove the ESC from the chassis housing, first I'll remove the motor wires, and these wires are color coded, so you can't really mess up the rewiring. So once that's separated, we need to disconnect the ESC connection from the receiver. So with the 2.5mm hex wrench, I'll remove the top receiver cover. And there's another tiny screw just beside the antenna tube, for which I'll have to use the 1.5mm hex wrench. It's actually a grub screw, so I'll keep this aside carefully. So the front part of the receiver box is separated, and there is some residue of some chemical over here, or maybe it's grease. There are two screws on the side of the receiver box which are hard to see, but in order to remove those, we need to slide the battery tray, and here is that screw, and there's one on this side. So here's the screw, and then I can just slide this out like that. So this is a bit of a hassle because you need to remove all the connectors on the receiver just to remove this top cover, and it's definitely not very convenient. This is the rubber seal for the waterproofing. I'll keep this aside. And here is the ESC wire. There is some grease over here which I'll have to make sure to clean from this connector. Alright, so once the ESC connector is separated from the receiver, I can remove the two screws that hold the ESC on the chassis. So there is one screw over here. So with the 2mm hex wrench, the ESC mounting screw can be removed. And there is one on this side. And I also need to remove the wires from this retainer. The trick here is to lift the ESC and push it forward, and separate it. So I had to struggle to remove this ESC, but it also means that the ESC is very well secured in the bracket. So the screw that holds the ESC to the chassis is actually through the top cover of the ESC, and it passes from the bottom and into the chassis hole. Now if you want, you can solder the connectors with the ESC installed on the truck, but because the chassis is all plastic, I don't want to accidentally burn any component or mess up the truck. So to be on the safer side, I've decided to remove the ESC. If I lift this, you can see the fan that's on top of the heatsink for the ESC. There is a fuse over here, and on this side there is this plastic connector. So there must be some sort of a module or something that would be connected over here. Alright, so this is a 10 amp fuse. Alright, so now to remove the connector, you don't have to cut the wire or cut open the connector. Instead, what you can do is either use a flathead screwdriver like this or a tweezer, and then push this connector so that the wire can slide out from the main housing, like so. Now you need to apply some downward pressure and push it. Similarly, the other connector. For me, it's easier with this tweezer. Of course, when you're using sharp tools like these, you have to be very careful. Okay, so once the wires are separated from the connector, I'll separate this metal connector from the wire. Here are my XT90 connectors, and whenever soldering connectors for the battery or ESC, always make sure that you have the right pair of the connector. So here are the male connectors which will go on the ESC wires. So I have my soldering iron over here. So the Traxxas connector is separated all the way. So now it's time to solder the XT90 connector. Now here you don't want to mess up the connection and be absolute sure that the positive and negative is correct. And if you want to use heat shrink, then make sure to install it at this time, and I'll be using heat shrink. And I forgot to remove the connector on the wire that bridges the two leads. So the wire that goes in between the two power leads is also separated from the Traxxas ID connector. Now it's time to solder the XT90 connectors. I will be using heat shrink to cover the solder joint, even though there is a plastic protection or cover for the XT90. First up, I'll tin the wires once more. So the connector has been tinned. Now it's time to solder the wire. And because this XT90 has this plastic cover, I'll have to make sure to install this at this stage. Alright. So the negative lead is soldered. Now I'll solder the middle wire. So I'll have to tin this first. So now the connector for the positive end. First I'll tin the connector. So now I'll solder the positive connector. So now it's time to just solder this bridging wire. Alright, so the thing is, I've used a thick heat shrink, and this plastic housing is unable to slide easily, so I'll have to remove the heat shrink. So now I'll just slide the cover. So one side is finished, have to finish the other one. I'll just cut the heat shrink because it's not the right size or the right thickness. So the last wire that's to be soldered. So the soldering process is complete. Now for the last time, I'll just make sure that all the connections are soldered correctly. So this main positive wire for the ESC is on the positive end of one connector, and this negative main wire is also on the negative connection, and the bridging wire positive on one end and negative, so everything is good to go. I'll just Alright, so I've replaced the connectors for the ESC with XT90. So let's install this and finish this video. Alright, so before I install the ESC back in the truck, I've actually opened the top cover just so that I can see how the ESC is from the inside. So these two tiny pins over here is where the fan is connected. So this is the fan connector, which is plugged over here. Then we have these three big capacitors. So these are 35 volt 1000 microfarad capacitors, and this is the easy set button to adjust the settings. The whole circuitry is actually covered in some coating, which is for the waterproofing, I think. And obviously this is the heat sink. I'll install this back. We'll have to make sure to install the fan connector correctly, and it's plugged in. The plastic quality of this ESC cover is absolutely terrible. It's very easy to crack the case or break it. And if you ever want to remove the fan, there are these three tabs that hold the fan together. If you push them out and pull the fan, you can separate it and replace it if you want. So I'll install the ESC now. So the ESC is secured. Now it's time to plug in the ESC cable to the receiver. Alright, so all the wires are connected. Alright, so all the wires are connected properly to the receiver. Now it's time to install the receiver cover. Before installing this cover, we need to disconnect all the wires, and this is definitely very irritating. Alright, so once again I'm making sure that all the wires for the receiver are connected correctly and I don't mess anything. So the top cover is in place. I'll install the screw. It's time to install this plastic part which holds the antenna. Then I have to install this grub screw which holds the receiver antenna tube in place. Then lastly, I'll connect the ESC and motor together. Everything is installed. I'll just zip tie the motor wires to the chassis. I have these 5000 milliamp hour 3S lipo batteries. Now if I ever plan to use these batteries, I'll have to use the plastic spacer. Time to connect and check. So I'm not sure what just happened, but it was a bit scary, so let me figure out and I'll get back. Okay, so I've removed the wheels from the truck just to be safe, and two things that I can think of are: one, my transmitter battery is low, and if I disable the TSM, the servo is actually working correctly and it's not moving left and right on its own. And because I was using 3S to test, I'm not sure what the low voltage cutoff is set on the ESC, because since this is a 8S version, I believe the voltage will be set on the 8S preference. So I need to charge the batteries and test with the 4S setup. I'm still not sure why the truck was acting weird, so I'd like to end this video here and I'll keep you guys updated. So that's all for now.